Good morning. As Brother Dan said, we have 4 chapters this morning to cover. I don't have a lot of notes. Not that I tend not to look at my notes. But I think most of what we look at this morning, it really, I don't want to say it is what it is, but it sort of is what it is. There may be some areas of it for clarification, and certainly any discussion that you would like regarding what we look at this morning, by all means, jump in, add comments, ask questions. Again, it's a much better class when it's not just me talking. So please do not feel intimidated to speak up. So just jump right in. Any thoughts, any questions? We are in Exodus chapter 21. Our lesson text, again, is 4 chapters, Exodus 21, 22, 23, and 24. As you might recall last week, we didn't get through it, but it incorporated, part of our lesson incorporated the 10 Commandments in Exodus chapter 20. And again, I want to emphasize, as we look at the law that God gave to Israel, law existed all the way back into the Garden of Eden. God gave a law. He said, of the tree of knowledge, thou shalt not eat of it, for in the day that you do, die. Some of you get Kleenexes. I know, I had to grab one because I walked out without my Sunday school book. All right. So there has always been law, and in reality, when God created man with a conscience. That I think that God himself drove to understand that there is a God, and that he is the supreme creator of all things, and that there are rights and wrongs in this world. Cain and Abel, clear example of a right and wrong. Adam and Eve, even in the garden, when they partook of the fruit, they knew they had committed sin. They hid themselves from God. Man over time has created his own laws. There have been laws from the establishing men on the earth. Now, many of them have not been driven by the laws of God. In truth, God's laws supersede all laws. When we want to know what truly is right and what is truly wrong, then always go back to God's laws. He gave the guidance, but man has, in his sin, deviated from God's laws over time. And even as we look this morning in chapter 21, and we start to talk about some of these laws that God has given to Israel, and he's going to give them to them verbally. He's going to follow up and give them in a written form too, written in stone. But he is establishing for them his laws as opposed to many of the laws that were already in place, especially among the heathens. So, all that said, the key verse is Exodus 24:7. And he took the book of the covenant and read in the audience of the people, and they said, all that the Lord hath said will we do, and be obedient. The application of the student will recognize the wisdom of the Word of God in giving Israel laws that would regulate their society for their good. So there was actually multiple purposes for the laws that God gave to Israel. One was to regulate society. What was another one? that applies to us today. Applied to them, applies to us. Why did God give the law, the commandments?
To show us that we can't keep them.
That's right.
We need Him.
Yeah, we need Him. Again, the law was perfect. The problem with the law isn't the law. The problem with the law is man misapplying the law to try, in the thought that by keeping the law, man can be saved. Man can't keep the law. It's impossible. The New Testament points that out time and time and time again. So, all right. Without rehearsing the whole thing going back, Israel was in captivity for over 400 years. They came out of the land of Egypt. They had been under that influence for a long time. God showed Himself in miracles and signs. He showed His magnificent power, His omniscience. And we come to the point where God establishes for them laws. Again, beginning with the Ten Commandments, sort of the beginning of it. And notice, and again, we didn't get through all the Ten Commandments last week. The first 4 commandments are man's relationship with whom? The 5th commandment is, actually the 5th and beyond, is man's relationship to other men. The 5th one is specific to parents. And we're going to see more of that. The first 9 commandments all are based on actions. Thou shalt not murder. Thou shalt not take the name of God in vain. Thou shalt honor thy father and thy mother. These are all actions. Thou shalt not lie. But the 10th one, which is which one? What does it tell us? Thou shalt not covet. Is that action? Or is it... Yeah, it really is more the inward man. And so, when we talk about the Old Testament law and action, it really did go beyond just actions. When Jesus, in the Sermon on the Mount, told them, it is said of men, thou shalt not kill, what did He then go on to say? But I say, thou shalt not hate. It wasn't really new, but it was a refreshing. And continuing through the rest of those commandments, it is a refreshing of what the law actually said, but it was incorporated in that 10th commandment. Thou shalt not covet. Because coveting is a desire of the heart, and it can be the driver within each of those other violations of any of the 10 commandments. All right. Chapter 21. Again, over 400 years of servitude, slavery in the land of Egypt. As God gives this, or passes this information to Moses, he begins in chapter 21 talking about the treatment of what? Servants. Servants or slaves, whatever term you'll see here, that we would probably call this a certain type of slave status, servant status, slave status, because they would have walked out of Egypt again with under the influence of what the Egyptians had practiced for 400 and plus years. And so I don't know for a fact, but I assume that's the reason he begins here with speaking about servants or slaves. So with that, somebody read Exodus 21, 1 through 11. And we'll talk about that real quick.
Now these are the judgments which thou shalt set before them. If thou buy an Hebrew servant, 6 years he shall serve, and in the 7th he shall go out free for nothing. If he came in by himself, he shall go out by himself. If he were married, then his wife shall go out with him. If his master have given him a wife, and she have borne him sons or daughters, the wife and her children shall be her master's, and he shall go out by himself. And if the servant shall plainly say, I love my master, my wife, and my children, I will not go out free. Then his master shall bring him unto the judges. He shall also bring him to the door, or unto the doorpost, and his master shall bore his ear through with an awl, and he shall serve him forever. And if a man sell his daughter to be a maidservant, she shall go out as the maidservants do. If she please not her master, who hath betrothed her to himself, then shall he let her be redeemed. To sell her unto a strange nation, he shall have no power, seeing he hath dealt deceitfully with her. And if he have betrothed her unto his son, he shall deal with her after the manner of daughters. If he take him another wife, her food, her raiment, and her duty of marriage shall be not dismissed. And if he did not these three unto her, then shall she go out free without money.
Okay. So, here, as it says, this is God's laws concerning slaves or, here, servants. Now, verse 2 tells us, if thou buy a Hebrew servant. And so, these are particular to the Jews. A Jew having a slave, having a servant of Jewish descent. Prior to God laying this out, what were the laws concerning slaves?
If they had them, they were for a lifetime.
Yeah, if they had them, it was for a lifetime.
Unless they sold them or made arrangements otherwise.
Yep. What were masters restricted in doing with their slaves? What were they considered? Property. So what could they do to their slaves? Pretty much whatever they wanted. They could kill them if they wanted, and because they were property, there were really no consequences. When did slavery begin? I don't know. I honestly don't know. We're not told in the scriptures, and it's not identified anywhere else. Is it of God? No.
It wasn't just 200 years ago.
That's right. It wasn't just 200 years ago. It has been in place for thousands of years.
And it wasn't just with the Hebrews either.
Wasn't just with the Hebrews. What was probably the number one cause of slavery? You saw it more probably in the Roman Empire.
Conquering somebody's land.
Yeah, when you went in and conquered. The Assyrians did it, the Babylonians did it. The Assyrians almost wiped out the northern 10 tribes, and what remained, they took back, and then they intermarried them to wipe out their culture, their religion, everything about them that they could. And that was the practice. Okay? So, before people look at God's word and say, well, God condoned slavery. No. God dealt with the condition of man in times past. He deals with the condition of man today and works on the hearts of men to do what's right. Okay? And so, as we look at this, God is establishing certain ways to deal with. There are 4, and I'm going off one of the writers, but there are 4 conditions outside of war that would bring about potential for slavery. The first one is during a condition of extreme poverty, a Hebrew might volunteer to serve for his subsistence. So, if there was famine in the land, if an individual's ability to provide for himself was no longer there, then he could sell himself into servitude. The second, a father could sell his own children into servitude. Again, going back to the condition of man, for many of these nations, women and children were considered very much property. Okay? I mean, that is how man dealt with man at the time. And so it's a bit of what was in place already. Third, a man might submit to servitude if his creditors, if he had creditors and he found himself not to be able to pay it back. So he could sell himself into servitude and work that debt off. And then fourth, a convicted thief who had nothing to pay for his restitution. And we'll look at thievery and the requirements for restitution for thievery. That thief could be required to serve in that capacity to pay off those debts. Okay? So those are the four outside of warfare. Okay? So there were several reasons, potential reasons, for servitude at the time. Verse 1. Now these are the judgments which thou shalt set before them. This is God giving these to Moses for them to enact. Verse 2. If thou buy a Hebrew servant, 6 years shall he serve, and in the 7th he shall go out free for nothing. What do we call that? Year of... Well, I started to say that, but it's actually... Well, so the 7th day, God created the earth in 6 days, and the 7th day he rested, and it is called the Sabbath, and the 7th year is the Sabbath year, and then 7 Sabbath years makes Jubilee. Okay. All right. Did you follow all that? What does Sabbath mean? It means rest. It is the 7th. It's the 7th. It means rest. And so, 7th day, what are you supposed to do? Rest. Old Testament. Now, why don't we do that now? Christ rose on the first day. And we celebrate his resurrection. And the example in the New Testament is that the saints came together on the first day. Okay? Let there be no gatherings when you come together. It was the first day. They came together the first day of the week. Pentecost. Alright, 7th. If thou buy a Hebrew servant, 6 years shall he serve, and in the 7th he shall go out free for nothing. So it's wiped out, clean slate. Verse 3, if he came in by himself, he shall go out by himself. So a single servant man coming in would go out free by himself. If he were... Let me jump back and read the whole thing. If he came in by himself, he shall go out by himself. If he were married, then his wife shall go out with him. If his master have given him a wife, and she have borne him sons or daughters, the wife and her children shall be her master's, and he shall go out by himself. Now, why is that? They were there as a commitment. Whatever that commitment was, and it has to be fulfilled. Okay? And so, the fact that his commitment is completed does not complete theirs. Alright? Verse 5. And stop me if you have questions. I don't know that I can answer. Honestly, I've never practiced any of this. Verse 5, and if the servant shall plainly say, I love my master, my wife, and my children, I will not go out free. Then his master shall bring him unto the judges, he shall also bring him to the door, or unto the doorpost, and his master shall bore his ear through with an awl, and he shall serve him forever. Now, that sounds ridiculous. What slave would want to continue as a slave? What slave would not want to be free? Thoughts?
Many of them here in the United States, after the Civil War, chose to stay with their masters and not.
Why would they do that?
Because they liked the lifestyle, they liked the master. And they were afraid of other things that they didn't know about.
Why did God put this law into place? There are those that will abuse. There always have been those that have abused. But there were also those that did not abuse, that were very beneficial. Now, I know in the world today that comment can be taken as an endorsement of slavery and derogatory in the sense of abusive slavery. That is not the case. We all have commitments in our lives. Sometimes while I was working, I felt like a slave. You know, there were things that were put on me that I sure on my own would not have wanted to perform. But it was required of me. It was expected of me. So, again, servants, slaves, workers today, there are a lot of crossovers and similarities. But be thankful when you have a boss or a master who is beneficial, who is looking out for your well-being. And that's what God was trying to establish here. That's what this is about. God was coming in to correct the sin of men in this relationship. So there were instances, down through time, there have been instances where those masters were very beneficial toward those that served under them, whether slave or servant. And we get into the New Testament, we see that Paul talks about it, and it's required of Christians. So, all right. Now, if that situation exists where that servant or slave does not want to leave his master, it's a good situation for him, then the master shall bring him to the judges. He shall also bring him to the door or unto the post, and his master shall bore his ear through with an awl. He'll get a piercing in the ear. That's basically what it is. I know a lot of people today get piercings showing ownership by someone. I don't know who. And he shall serve him forever. That was a joke, sort of. All right. Any other thoughts or questions on that? We move on, verse 7. And if a man sell his daughter to be a maidservant, she shall not go out as the men servants do. If she please not her master, who hath betrothed her to himself, then shall he let her be redeemed to sell her unto a strange nation. He shall have no power, seeing he have dealt deceitfully with her, and if he have betrothed her unto his son, he shall deal with her after the manner of daughters. If he take him another wife, her food, her raiment, and her duty of marriage shall not be diminished. If he do not these three unto her, then shall she go out free without money. So, what's different here about the daughter? You'll notice some terms used in here. Betrothed. Engaged. Okay? So, engaged. He sells his daughter to be a maidservant. She shall not go out as the men servants do. Why is that? Why wouldn't he just cut her loose and she'd be free to go off on her own?
No way to make a living.
That's exactly right. It would have done a disservice to her. Again, because of the times. Women today can go out and earn a living. Many women do it. But not at that time. They couldn't own property. Ruth and Naomi, perfect example. They couldn't own property. Again, it was the structure, the culture of the times. And so God, in protecting these women so that they weren't taken advantage of, gave these instructions. If she please not her master, if he has decided not to marry her, then shall he let her be redeemed. Who could redeem her? Next of kin. Again, going back to Ruth and Naomi.
Next of kin who was willing.
Who was willing, yes, thank you.
And could pay the price.
That's right. Then shall he let her be redeemed. To sell her to a strange or foreign nation, he couldn't. Why? They were not subject unto the laws of God. These laws were given to Israel, and to sell her into another Hittite, Canaanite, then what was her protections? So this was to protect her, seeing he had dealt deceitfully with her. In other words, he had purchased her for the purpose of marrying and then had a change of heart and mind. Verse 9, and if he hath betrothed her unto his son, he shall deal with her after the manner of daughters. In other words, if his son decided, no, I'm not marrying her, then what was he obligated to do? Treat her as a daughter. Okay? Provide for her. Take care of her. Verse 10, if he take him another wife, her food, her raiment, and her duty of marriage shall he not diminish. In other words, had to provide for her as if carried through. Okay? If he do not these three unto her, then shall she go out free without money. All right. Any questions? Good, because somebody would have to work on the answer beyond me. I don't know. All right. Now, again, it's sort of odd that God began with servants, slaves, as the first topic. He then comes to verse 12, and this really is getting into capital punishment, manslaughter, murder, keeping in mind, and we didn't get to this last week, thou shalt not kill, 10 commandments. That killing, many people today want to use it in a very broad sense. Thou shalt not kill. They don't want capital punishment. There is never an excuse for taking a life. But in reality, that word that's used for kill, and I may have mentioned this last week, I can't remember what I've studied, what I've thought in my head, what I have intended to say, and what I have said. But that word of 7 different words that talks about taking the life of an individual, that is the most exact word for what we use today for murder. Premeditated. Intentional. Okay? It is absolute. Thou shalt not kill. Thou shalt not murder. It doesn't mean that you cannot go off to war to protect country. It does not mean that you cannot defend your family. That's not what it means. And in fact, it'll get into some of that as we go on through. So, believe the Bible or believe other men and other religions and what they teach about, I don't want to say avenging, because we are not to avenge, God avenges, but taking proper justice for those that take life. All right. Verse 12. And I'll also note, Genesis 9:6 really goes back to, that's Noah there, capital punishment, again restated, or stated there in Genesis 9 and 6. We won't take the time to read it, but you can look at it in leisure. He that smiteth a man, verse 12, so that he die, shall be surely put to death. Today we refer to that as capital punishment. Okay? A murder, premeditated, someone who has planned treachery against someone else. That's what it's talking about. Verse 13. And if a man lie not in wait, but God deliver him into his hand, then I will appoint thee a place whither he shall flee. Now, what's this referring to? Cities of refuge, yes. Deuteronomy 19 talks about cities of refuge. There, God gives them 3, and as the nation expands, He gives them the ability to add 3 more. Cities of refuge. Now, what was a city of refuge? If a man was killed, if an individual was killed, then the one who perpetrated it could do what? Flee to that city. As long as they stayed in that city, they were safe for what to occur? Judgment. It didn't give them a pass. You couldn't murder somebody and then run to a city of refuge and get away with it. And in fact, as we go on, verse 14, but if a man come presumptuously upon his neighbor to slay him with guile, it's premeditated, thou shalt take him from mine altar that he may die. So, for an individual who commits murder, what is their safety? In the end, there is none. When it's found that they're guilty of murder, it does not matter that they're in a city of refuge. It doesn't matter that they've made it in to the holy place, to the altar. It is no protection for that individual that murders. Now that is different than some religions want to teach today. Many pagan religions back at that time, but also many religions today want to say the church is the shelter. Not once they've been found to be guilty. There is no shelter at that point. Okay? And that's what it's talking about. There were 3 cities. Deuteronomy 19 tells us about them. And then also, as the nation of Israel grew, they had that ability to add 3 more cities to it. And again, stop me. I'm trying to move through here quickly, but I don't want to cut off any questions or comments. Verse 15, he that smiteth his father or his mother shall be surely put to death. It'll come back, in fact, verse 17. He that curseth his father or his mother shall surely be put to death. What do those 2 verses tell us about the relationship, father and mother?
Well, in our house, we wouldn't have had nobody would have had to do anything, you'd have been dead on the spot.
Yes. Yeah. Why is this so important? It's a commandment. God told us. What's the logical reason for it? You should love them. We're told to love. We're told to love. What does father and mother represent to the children?
God the Father.
God the Father. Authority. If there is no respect for father and mother, then what respect is there for any authority? And when we speak of the Father in heaven, his authority, what's the purpose behind it? It is to help establish for young people proper authority. When you look around today, does it exist? Well, it does. Yeah, it does, but yeah, it really has been diminished. There are many that have no respect for, and in fact, there are those that would love to incorporate euthanasia and get rid of the elderly because they have no reason, they have no need for it. But it's a shame because the scriptures tell us the older, those with the white hair, or what? Have wisdom. That's right. All right. Now we can always point to someone with white hair who breaks that law. But by and large, years equates to experience, equates to wisdom. Okay?
When they don't respect their parents, then the parents have lost control, and then there's no.
That's right.
I had a patient tell me they're an early teenager and we were talking about her child or something. She goes, "Well, I can't make them." I'm like, "You can't."
Yeah.
I'm like, "Oh, okay."
Yeah, you can.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can. And you better.
Right.
You need to.
Well, you're held accountable.
You are held accountable.
That child is a gift, and
Yep.
God's going to hold you accountable for it.
And we think of our children as ours, but you're exactly right. It's a gift. They belong to God. And we've been charged with them for a certain amount of time, and it's for the purpose of raising them and training them in all things. All right. We skipped over verse 16. And he that stealeth a man, what do we call that? Kidnapping. And selleth him, or if he be found in his hand, he shall surely be put to capital punishment. There are many things that constitute capital punishment. There are some things that do not, and if we get that far, doubtful. If we get that far, we'll look at those. We already looked at 17, verse 18. And if men strive together, and one smite another with a stone, or with his fist, and he die not, but keepeth his bed, if he rise again and walk abroad upon his staff, then shall he that smote him be quit, or without guilt. Only he shall pay for the loss of time, and shall cause him to be thoroughly healed. What's it saying there? What do we call that?
Medical expense.
That's right. Personal injury. You ever heard the term?
If you ever turn on the TV, you hear it.
That's right. I get so sick of personal injury lawyers.
What you deserve.
What you deserve. Well, here God lays out what they deserve. What is it? What does God say about it?
You don't give them millions of dollars. You help them get back on their feet. You help them do what's required.
That's right. So, take care of their medical bills. Make sure that they're taken care of while they're convalescing. And repay to them what they lost in their earnings, in their labors that they couldn't perform. That's what God says is just. Is that what personal injury lawyers are going after? No. The system is set up so that they...
So they get a third, whatever.
Yeah, I have to be careful. I really want to go off on a tangent here. But there are many things about our existing legal system. Personal injury lawyers really get under my skin because they're taking off a huge chunk. And so it behooves them to get as much money, whether it's deserved or not. Class action is another one. they lump all of these people that so-called were harmed, and they try to pull as many people in, whether they truly were harmed or not, as part of that. And then who walks away with the big bucks? Probably many of you have gotten these letters in the mail. If you've been harmed by, well, they could pull in millions and billions of dollars, but in the end, who walks away with the bulk of it? It won't be those that are involved in the class action. Yeah. Oftentimes, it works out for everybody except the ones that were injured. An example was an airline that was involved in a class action, and so they were required to give vouchers for future flights as partial payment, but as the one who was harmed, what did you have to do? You had to buy a ticket and use this. It only offset part of that cost. The airline's still making money on it. So, but anyway, that was my tangent. It happens all the time. It is what it is in today's world. But it's not what God established here. Compensate for the actual loss, the medical, and the wages. Verse 20. If a man smite his servant or his maid with a rod, and he die under his hand, he shall be surely punished. Notwithstanding, keep in mind, again, for the rest of the world, there was no such thing as punishment. You could take the life of your servants, they were property, and there was no punishment at all. This implemented punishment. Verse 21. Notwithstanding, if he continue a day or two, he shall not be punished, for he is his money. In other words, the thought here is that sometimes in the exercise of judgment or discipline, someone may be harmed unintentionally. That's the way I read this. Now, I don't know if anybody has other thoughts. Verse 22. If men strive and hurt a woman with child, so that her fruit depart from her, what does that mean, fruit depart? Well, no. Her fruit depart from her, and yet no mischief follow, so she has the baby early. However, what's the condition of the baby? Yeah, the baby is fine. He shall surely be punished according to the woman's husband, which lay upon him, will lay upon him, and he shall pay as the judges determine. So, this fight causes premature birth. Then there is a judgment. But it's not, the baby didn't die. There is to be determined what the compensation would be. So that's childless. Verse 23 is child die. And if any mischief follow, then thou shalt give life for life. Why? Because conception, because life begins at, I gave the answer, conception. All right. He goes on, verse 24 and 25, actually 23, 24, and 25. And if any mischief follow, then thou shalt give life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burning for burning, wound for wound, stripe for stripe. Many people try to use these three verses to justify what? Vengeance. Yet the scriptures say, God says, vengeance is mine. That's not what this is about judgment. Okay? It's about exercising justice. And it's not for me to exercise it. It is for proper judgment, justice, those that are in the rightful position to exercise it. All right. Any thoughts or questions? Quickly running out of time. Verse 26. And if a man smite the eye of his servant or the eye of his maid, that it perish, he shall let him go free for his eye's sake. Now, how many masters want to do that? That's right. It's loss of money. If that individual had stolen and was repaying, well, what happens to the repayment? Boom, it's gone. You know, it is a monetary hit to that master. Verse 27, if he smite out his manservant's tooth or his maidservant's tooth, he shall let him go free for his tooth's sake. Verse 28, if an ox gore a man or a woman that they die, then the ox shall be surely stoned, put to death. And his flesh shall not be eaten, but the owner of the ox shall be quit or free of guilt. However, verse 29, if the ox were wont to push, in other words, this is not the first time, there's been a history of it. If the ox were wont to push with his horn in time past, and it hath been testified to his owner, and he hath not kept him in, but that he hath killed a man or a woman, the ox shall be killed, just as in the first case. But what else happens? His owner shall also be put to death. You're responsible for your animals. First time, unaware. Second time, then it cost the owner his life. Verse 30, if there be laid on him a sum of money, then he shall give for the ransom of his life whatsoever is laid upon him. Now what's this talking about? We haven't seen this previously with the taking of life, but here we have a word, ransom. Ransom of a life. What does that mean?
Money paid.
An amount of money. Not determined by the owner, but by the judges that would mete out the punishment. There may be the opportunity for a ransom of life, whatsoever is laid upon him. Verse 31, whether he have gored a son or have gored a daughter, according to this judgment, shall it be done unto him. So, talked about men and women. Again, children were property. This gives them the same protections as mothers, fathers, men and women. Verse 32, if the ox shall push a manservant or a maidservant, he shall give unto their master 30 shekels of silver, and the ox shall be stoned. Why 30 shekels of silver? This is very specific. It was the price of a slave. Property. Price of a slave. It was the same as what Judas was paid to betray the Son of God. That of a slave. Verse 33, and if a man shall open a pit, or if a man shall dig a pit and not cover it, and an ox or an ass fall therein, the owner of the pit shall make it good, and give money unto the owner of them, and the dead beast shall be his. And if one man's ox hurt another's, that he die, then they shall sell the live ox and divide the money of it, and the dead ox also they shall divide. Or, if it be known that the ox hath used to push in time past, and his owner hath not kept him in, he shall surely pay ox for ox, and the dead shall be his own. Again, where an owner is aware of previous history of that animal, they are responsible. Okay? Questions? All right. We've only got 3 chapters to go, and no minutes left. Chapter 22 gets into restitution. It talks about, in the first part of it, restitution for stealing. It talks about, verse 3, if the sun be risen upon him, there shall be blood shed for him, for he should make full restitution. If he have nothing, then he shall be sold for his theft. That's the repayment. We talked about that, and one of the reasons for slavery or servitude. I actually skipped over verse 2. If a thief be found breaking in, and be smitten that he die, there shall no blood be shed for him. In other words, someone breaking and entering, and they're killed in the process of it, then that one that took his life is guilt-free, with an exception. Verse 3, if the sun be risen upon him, there shall be bloodshed for him, for he should make full restitution. If he have nothing, then he shall be sold for his theft. The indication is that at nighttime, taking the life of is within the law. But in the daytime, you're expected to do what you can to avoid the taking of life. Why the difference?
Deceit coming in the darkness.
Yeah, there's deceit in coming in the darkness. There is, light opens up our ability to see what's occurring, and you can better see whether or not taking that life is the right path or not. At night, you don't know what they got, right? In the darkness, do you know, somebody who walks in, do you know if they've got their cell phone in their hand or a gun? Why do people commit crime at night? So they don't get caught, so things are concealed so that it's... So...
They live darkness rather than light.
That's right. God recognizes that. And he applies the expectations to it. In other words, the fact that somebody is doing you wrong does not necessarily justify you just to shoot him in the head. That's maybe a bad way to put it, but... Well, very good. We'll have to stop there. I see we're starting to get the signal. Any questions or thoughts or comments? Does it make sense what God has established for Israel? Again, based on the time, the cultures, and what was going on around them.